Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Katie Greifeld. We're counting you down to the closing bell. Here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with our friends Carol Massar and Maddy Mills. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio Originals, and those folks streaming on YouTube. A risk-on day. All the major indices holding on to pretty strong gains. Big tech out in front. You mentioned it earlier, Carol. Solar stocks getting a bid. Pretty much everything out there. You have a few down spots here, but pretty much everything right now getting attention.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think what's interesting is bank stocks, we know we get the big bank earnings. They start underway and kicking off kind of officially earnings season. But what's interesting is the KBW Bank Index, yeah, it's up, but not up as much as we're seeing in terms of gains in the S&P, Dow, and NASDAQ. It's up about 0.75 of a percentage point. So maybe investors just kind of waiting to see what we get tomorrow.
Yeah, and on the banking story, Carol, we've been talking about this all week, but the key thing to look at, even for the Fed, our Fed guy, Steve Matthews, said this to us earlier in our show, we got to look at those outflows and those deposit numbers tomorrow. That's going to be so critical to suss out what the Fed's going to do.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what investors are going to be focused on, sort of the flow of deposits, whether they're moving into money market funds, whether they're raising the rates on those accounts. All of that is obviously going to be heavily in focus.
Well, we should point out we did get the Investment Company Institute data for the last week. Of course, this is through the week ending April 12th here. And of course, assets in the money markets continue to flow in pretty strongly here. Basically about $8 billion from the retail side, and institutional money was over $22 billion in that most recent week. Let's turn back to the equity markets here as we do get the closing bell in New York, and finally a day where the folks really do have a reason to clap and cheer. A Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by almost 400 points on the day. That amounts to an increase of about 1.4%. It looks like it's going to close right around that 34,000 level. The S&P 500 up by more than 50 points or 1.3%, right around 4,140 and change as we wait for the numbers to settle. The NASDAQ Composite higher by more than 200 points or 2% on the day. And the Russell 2000 not missing out on the action, higher by about 23 points or 1.3%.
Yeah, and check out the VIX, everybody. Down about 1.25 points. We're talking at 1784. It's just fascinating to see just the complacency and the ease, if you will, when it comes to looking at the VIX specifically. Having said that, maybe it makes sense, Katie, because you look at, as Romaine mentioned, so many names higher in today's session.
And you saw that on the industry group level as well. Definitely more green than red. And what's interesting, you look at what's at the top, it's your tech names, tech, hardware, and equipment. That name was all the way down at the bottom the past few days or so. Now it's all the way at the top, up nearly 3% today alone. Retail also getting a bid, as to are those media and entertainment names. You look at still what didn't do too well today. There's only 2 of them that ended up in the red, but real estate and insurance companies, Carol, today falling by 4 to 0.5%.
A lot of green there on the screen. So easy for me, I guess. A lot of individual gainers to play with. But Romaine mentioned it. I mentioned it earlier. The solar companies, really some outperformance in today's session. Top in the S&P 500 and NASDAQ 100. Enphase Energy up just shy of 7% in today's session. HSBC initiating coverage with a buy. Price target of 271. Stock closing at 209 and change. So they're looking for some significant upside. Deutsche Bank also initiating a short-term callous buy view on the company, calling it the firm's top pick with solar companies. So, yeah, the street liked that name today. Netflix up about 4.6%, also a top gainer among the names in the S&P and NASDAQ 100. Not a clear catalyst, so it's interesting, but we'll get ready for when that company certainly reports earnings shortly. Not today, but it's coming, everybody. And then LVMH, the stock up about 3.6%.
That's a bold call. You think it's really coming? By the way, it is on the 18th
in a world
of April. So we like to be precise here, Carol Massar.
Thank you, though, for that precision. It's like you passed your a test or something, and you're like, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. All right, LVMH, sales soaring as Chinese shoppers bounce back from some of the world's strictest lockdowns. You know the story there. Organic sales of the group's biggest unit, which sells fashion and leather, up 18% in the first quarter.
Well, what I thought was interesting about the LVMH, I mean, everyone's
market
focused.
cap?
Well, no, everyone's focused on China, but sales in Japan were up like 30-something%, sales in Europe as well. So it's not just the Chinese buyers. Everyone's out there buying.
Everyone but the U.S., that
Everyone
is.
but the U.S.
Well, you've been shopping, right? Like Louis Vuitton.
I'm not much of a...
Oh, big time.
Oh, come on. We see the luggage when you travel. You can be real with us. We love you. We love you. All right, Maddie, what do you got?
I mean, you deserve all of the luxury travel gear, Romaine. But let's talk about some. I mean, you're going to need it for Delta coming up this summer. Summer bookings strong,
nice.
Thank you, Katie. Reversing last quarter's performance a little bit. They're offloading their cargo operations. Other airlines did that post-COVID. Took Delta a little bit longer. They might have that catching up to them a little bit. And then we've got Progressive. We've been talking about this all day. Falls by as much as 8.2% earlier today. Now down on the close about 6.7%. That is the most on the day in 6 months after the insurance company reported results for March in the first quarter, in which the combined ratio increased. And then we've got REI, that's Ring Energy Inc., slipping as much as 7.7 on the day, closing at a little over 8% after the oil and gas company announced an exercise and price reduction of nearly all of its outstanding warrants.
Let's take a look at the Treasury market, because there were some interesting moves there today here. Earlier in the day, we were talking about a 2-day sell-off kind of flipping to 2 days of buying, but that actually came to a halt here. There were a lot of oscillations and a lot of volume right around 3 p.m. Eastern time in the Treasury space, particularly on the short end of the curve. So we were looking at a day where we were actually seeing yields go down, but they actually finished the day higher. Keep a look on your screen, 3.966 right now on a 2-year yield. That's only up fractionally here, but when you consider that we were down around 3.89 at one point on the day.
How do you make sense of that?
I mean, that's the
Right?
big question mark here. It's something that as soon as I get off air, going to have to dig into it. But you saw that pretty much across the curve. And it gets to the idea, though, Carol, and we've been talking about this idea that there is a little bit of divergence in what bond market investors are seeing and what equity market investors are seeing. And you kind of wonder, A, do they need to reconcile that, or are they just going to go on their own merry way?
You know, we talked with Steve Matthews earlier, who covers the Fed, too, for us here at Bloomberg, and he said, you know, some of it, too, you know, you see divergence in what the Fed speakers are saying to some extent. So I think it's kind of all over the place, and investors trying to figure out, maybe just depending on the day. But I just think it's interesting that we finished off our lows here on the when it comes to yields in the Treasury.
Yeah, and
trade.
maybe they quibble in their spoken commentary. But the fact that, I mean, if you look at Powell's tenure as Fed chief, there's been very, very few dissents when it comes to actual votes. I find that really interesting. Definitely something.
I feel like that has to change over the next couple of meetings.
You know, but you think about the past 3 years we've had getting through the pandemic with almost very few dissenting votes. I mean, it's really a feat, and it speaks to how united this Federal Reserve has been. When it comes to the bond market specifically and that disconnect that we have with the equity market, I don't know if this week got us any closer to being on the same page, because, I mean, you still have the 2-year yield below 4%, pricing in, I don't know, perhaps a recession, at least a Fed that's going to have to cut. And at the same time, you have the equity market marrying.
That's what I don't understand, because everyone says, oh, well, the equity market's rally because they think the Fed will cut. If the Fed has to cut, doesn't that mean economic conditions would be weak?
It depends. Like if you get that soft landing, right, where maybe growth, maybe we don't have a recession, but it just slows down and maybe it feels not so great. But if you don't maybe officially have a recession, maybe we don't have a lot of layoffs. Maybe we do have a slowdown, right? We've talked about this. Could we have a relatively strong job market and yet have an economic slowdown?
It's certainly possible here. I do want to push ahead a little bit. We get more economic data tomorrow with retail sales, and you kind of alluded to it, though. This is really about the big onslaught of earnings that we're about to get tomorrow, including from Citigroup, Wells Fargo. And then also, don't forget, I think United Health is in there as well, so not just the banks.
Not just the banks, but of course, all the focus will be on the banks, especially after the past month that we've had, like Maddie said, a lot of focus on deposits, but too, also a lot of focus on what the executives have to say about the state of the economy, the state of the consumer, whether or not they're loaning to that consumer.
It's really not about the numbers so much as about the commentary.
Yeah, the context, right? Like what kind of loan origination are we seeing? What kind of credit pressures are we seeing? We talked with Sri Natarajan about the banks that all helped out First Republic. You know, what's the result of them having to raise their loan losses? Just trying to get some context around the banking sector, not just the big banks, but really more broadly.
Yeah, I just think that credit tightening story, we can't talk about it enough. And that is going to be, I mean, I know retail sales, it's really important, and I love a consumer angle, guys, but I just feel like those bank earnings tomorrow are going to be so critical.
Romaine, can we talk about a little bit more about your
About
accomplishment?
Louis Vuitton?
I love it.
Are you going to go shopping
I know
at
Katie-
LVMH as a result?
Well, I'm just trying now to convince Katie to give up her social life for about 3 years and follow my lead. So
3 years if I pass everything at the first try, right? This is a
which I didn't. We should just point
I know.
that out.
I asked.
Everyone's like, oh, you're so smart. You're so smart. You know
Romaine, you told me that it took more than 300 hours to study. Do you remember this?
I do remember this. Yeah, I lived
that
it.
is
Yes,
a commitment.
That is all together.
So
I mean,
you passed your third level? Is that what happened?
The third level, yes, Carol. There's 3 levels, one, and then 2, and then 3. They get progressively harder. Then when you get to 3, if you pass it, you apply, you get your charter.
So do we like bow down as you walk around the newsroom?
Well, yeah. Once when I get my charter, Carol, you can bet.
I'm actually really impressed. I know it's very
dip it in gold and wrap it around my neck and just walk around the office.
As you should.
And make everyone refer to me as comma CFA.
Good.
You know what, guys? He ain't kidding.
No.
No, congratulations. Really, really, really
Thank
impressive.
you. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage. We got big bank earnings, of course, tomorrow. We'll be talking about that in our breakdown and our simulcast. So a wrap on radio, on TV, Bloomberg Originals, and, of course, on YouTube. We call it Beyond the Bell. We will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.